we successful in where we linked and delinked our experimental technological objectives from our training objectives.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year, but so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the Valley of Death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Sheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley.
In September 2021, U.S. Army Chief of Staff General James McConville released Chief of Staff Paper No. 1, titled Army Multi-Domain Transformation, Ready to Win in Competition and Conflict. In the paper, the Chief of Staff laid out a vision for the Multi-Domain Task Force, or MDTF. He described it as theater-level maneuver elements designed to synchronize precision effects and precision fires in all domains against adversary anti-access area denial, or A2AD, networks. Now, cutting through the Army speak, these are to be fusion cells designed to take in information from a range of sensing equipment across air, land, sea, and space, and to ensure America's freedom of maneuver, no matter the domain. The Army originally planned to build 5 such task forces, 2 aligned to the Indo-Pacific region, 1 aligned to Europe, 1 stationed in the Arctic, and a 5th aligned for global response. Today, we currently have 3. The second multi-domain task force, or the second MDTF, is headquartered in Germany in support of U.S. Army Europe and Africa. It includes a headquarters element, an intelligence, cyberspace, and electronic warfare, and space detachment, and a brigade support company. This May, the second MDTF will carry out its premier annual exercise, designed to both introduce new capabilities, evaluate them, and test existing ones. In this conversation, I had the good fortune to sit down with Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Burns, the Deputy Commander of the 2nd MDTF, and Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Ritzema, Commander of the 2nd Multi-Domain Effects Battalion. We covered the task force, what it's like to create something new in the Army, and the upcoming exercise. We plan to reconvene with this team in the wake of their exercise to learn about what they discovered. So, sit back and enjoy the conversation with the 2nd Multi-Domain Task Force. All right, Lieutenant Colonel Aaron Ritzema, Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Burns, the Multi-Domain Task Force, Multi-Domain Effects Battalion out in Germany. It is awesome to have you guys here ahead of a big exercise I hear you have coming up. This is an interesting one for us because a lot of what we do on Crossing the Valley talks about external capability that's moving up the kind of maturity flagpole. But you guys are developing things internal to the Army. I think that's awesome. So excited for this conversation today. Let's just kick it off with what is the 2nd Multi-Domain Task Force? What's the battalion? What are you guys up to over there?
So, I mean, I'll try to answer from the task force perspective and then let Aaron talk about his battalion. But, I mean, I think what we are is unique for the Army because I think we're contributing to the joint force, which, by design. And then really what we're offering and providing is being the extended range, all domain reconnaissance effort, in the different theaters that the multi-domain task forces are located in, and then simultaneously able to provide lethal, non-lethal, kinetic, non-kinetic effects. And I think just very unique right now in the Army because we're also able to experiment and iterate and do other things that I think a lot of other units are not able to do just given kind of their charter and their mission.
Yeah, awesome. Before we move off of that, the explanation makes sense, and for a lot of our audience are folks from a tech background or an investing background. They may not fully speak Army yet, and so when you talk about kinetic effects and long range reconnaissance, break that down for us. What are you really talking about there?
So I think traditionally in reconnaissance, right, you want to send a scout out. He needs to observe something either with a sensor, like a set of optics, or his or her own eyes. And we're trying to do the same thing at a much greater distance. And in addition to the challenge of just finding the right thing in the box, we have to find the right thing in the electromagnetic spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if I could jump on that too, Tommy. So I think fundamentally too, so the multi-domain task force, kind of a new project by the Army in the last couple of years, comprising of a fires element. So that would be your kinetic artillery piece. The multi-domain effects battalion, which is really going to be your find that adversary. So, much like, cavalry of old, horse, you got horse troops out there going around. Really, their primary purpose in life is to find that enemy faster than the enemy can find you, and then that enables the commander to make decisions. For us, those decisions then kind of turn into, can we deliver some sort of kinetic round to actually kill or destroy that adversary, or are there other things that we want to do to them to actually enable other follow-on actions with that? And really the uniqueness to the multi-domain task force and really what makes us kind of different from traditional Army formations is that we've put a lot of these capabilities that have historically been reserved at joint and higher level, national level commands, and we've really put them in the hands of a commander who can actually kind of bring all of these different capabilities to find an adversary and then deliver some sort of effect on that adversary in support of a larger joint plan like Tommy was alluding to. So, in terms of, what's new for us or kind of relating that back to folks who may not be fully inculcated in all the Army jargon that's out there, really it's how fast can I find an adversary and then how fast can I enable some sort of effect on them in support of kind of a larger joint plan. Think Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines being able to do kind of combined joint operations in the traditional sense. And that's really what I think we bring to the table from an Army perspective.
Yeah, so I appreciate all that lay down. I think maybe just to kind of like put a bow on this initial overview here, you guys own everything from the in find, fix, finish, right? In this framework of what's the target, who are we going after, what are we going after, and then to closing that kill chain and actually delivering some sort of effect, having some sort of impact on a target. This task force owns that whole life cycle. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. And is there a subset of missions for which you all are the primary executor, or is this spans kind of all domains, all missions?
So there are target sets that we are kind of initially aligned towards, and really the genesis of the MDTFs was really that anti-access area denial mission set. So think adversary air defense, adversary long-range surface missiles, all the things that an adversary, regardless of theater, might try and use to kind of extend that reach and keep the joint force from being able to close with them and actually, bring some of the more superior firepower that we have to bear on an adversary. So really, MDTFs were designed to kind of punch holes in that A2AD bubble, as kind of the way we phrase it. And so being able to bring all these capabilities, punch that hole, and then be able to enable a follow-on joint force mission is kind of what we were designed to do, at least from the initial onset.
Interesting. Yeah, so let's talk about that initial onset and what you were designed to do. First of all, how long has the task force been around, and what can you tell us about the genesis of this concept?
So I think currently the Army has started building 3, right? The goal is to build 5. Each of us are about 2 years spaced out. So first is about 2 years ahead of us. Third is about 2 years behind us. First and third aligned with the Indo-Pacific right now, and then second aligned to Europe. And then, so for us, really, right, like end of 2021, started the build for second here in Germany.
Yeah, and I was going to say, A2AD traditional, or at least initially, folks think about the Pacific, the Indo-Pacific as kind of the primary theater there. Interesting that the second task force to be set up is actually focused on Europe. Current events may or may not have had something to do with that. You guys don't have to say it. We can say it on this side. So as the Army kind of progresses in this construct, what's your relationship with the other task forces? Are there information sharing? Do you do joint exercises? Like, how do you all ensure that you're learning from one another across the board?
So I think we get to do that both formally and informally. So yeah. A lot of there are formal twice a year in person, kind of bring the band together with the key players in the acquisition space and the future space and the DA staff and the task forces, and that kind of forces it. And then there are the informal commander to commander discussion, staff section to staff section, innovation officer to innovation officer, that we just really do have good relationships right now across the board with all three of us. And I mean, I think Aaron, especially with the MDevs being most built out in all three, probably has even more.
Yeah, we have a lot of informal touch points, and then I have a group chat with all the other MDev commanders where we're constantly kind of sharing lessons learned. And I think one of the other things we've seen, especially in the last, I'd say 12 months, is the Army starting to do a really good job of circulating soldiers who have served with one MDTF back into the other MDTFs, and that really kind of helps create some of that cross-pollination. In both, the Indo-PACOM and then the, UCOM aligned MDTFs, different problem sets to a certain degree. So it's interesting to see how we're both solving similar problem sets, but maybe with a different way. And so being able to kind of bring that back in and then use that to kind of keep us all moving in the same direction is helpful.
Yeah, no, very cool. So let's unpack it a little bit further, just in terms of how the task force and the battalion are actually organized, how they fit within UCUR and the broader UCOM kind of command structure. First off, what are the different components to the task force, and then how do you integrate with these other elements?
Do you want me to talk integration and you can talk MDEV?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So we are aligned with USARAF underneath the UCOM commander, and then we work for the 56 multi-domain command, akin in the Pacific really to the theater fire zone out there, but here as an actual like command structure.
Yep.
And then all of that feeds into USARAF, into UCOM, and then Aaron will lay out the specifics. But right now, task force as we are built is MDEB starting to stand up fires, right? Starting to stand up some other of the battalions, but with his being the only one really full build, Aaron will lay out where the multi-domainness, I think, comes into the battalion and task force.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. So the MDEB comprised of a headquarters company, of course. We've got a signal company, and really the task and purpose of that signal company, really in direct support to the task force, providing that mission command network that's going to support all of the battalions, to include my battalion and also the task force networks. We've got a military intelligence company, and so the way that we've kind of oriented our MICO in a slight variation on what first and third are doing out in the Pacific. So we basically built the all source collection element, or the ACE, that's actually doing direct target analysis and intelligence support to the task force. So really, those are both my contributions kind of back out to both 56 multi-domain command and then also the 2nd MDTF headquarters. But then really my maneuver formations inside this are the extended range sensing and effects company, which at full build will consist of a UAS platoon, an EW platoon, and a high altitude balloon platoon. I've got a space company that will consist of 2 platoons. One of them will be modular and have kind of a more dismounted space control kit, and then one of them will have a larger program of record that's getting fielded to all the space components out there in the Army. And then last but not least, an information defense company that's got a defensive cyber element, and then it's also got a defensive electromagnetic attack platoon. And so really those kind of 3 companies, and we've been experimenting with kind of how we task organize those to get after the most flexibility from a mission command perspective. But those are really the contributors to the multi-domain components and the multi-domain aspects of the MDTF.
Yeah, it's definitely multifaceted. You guys have a lot going on inside the organization, and I'm curious about how you actually accomplish the missions that you've been that you're chartered with, that you're tasked with. Even in terms of, is this an acquisition organization? Is this an integration organization? Are you handed tools and it's like, hey, go figure this out? Like, tell us a little bit how you guys actually accomplish the task that you've been given, the mission you've been given.
Yeah. So I think the short answer to that is we are all of those things and more. So
softball, man.
That's right. Yes, the answer is yes. So a couple things to unpack there. And so one of the fun things about being, the MDEV commander, in addition to all the smart folks that we have in the organization, is like I don't have one platoon that's the same as any other platoon across all of my companies. And so there's a lot of different pieces that kind of come with that, both from like a training and certification standpoint. So all the soldiers that show up that do each of these, which in other organizations would be considered a low density MOS, each of them come with the kind of their own training certification pipeline that goes with that. The other piece of that is from the equipping standpoint. And so when you look at, each of those platoons and sections, as I kind of laid them out, each of them have a varying degree of equipment, either currently in the Army inventory that'll eventually show up, stuff that's not in the Army inventory that we're working through, trying to inform and go back to those PEOs and develop those requirements documents that'll eventually drive those material solutions. And then some of it is, we are actively participating. So we have a piece of military intelligence kit where we're actively participating with 10CAP and helping provide them feedback on how that kit's actually working and how it can be employed or how it can be improved upon. So we really kind of run the gamut from like an actual established program of record that's fielded and resourced by the Army all the way up to, there's nothing that's identified and we know it's going to be a few years before that actually hits our hands. And so, as we kind of talk in the future in this conversation about, where the lab fits in and where innovation fits in, really it's our attempt to start to try and fill some of those capability and training gaps across all of those different organizations inside the battalion and the task force, realizing that each of them are kind of in a different place depending on, where they are and where their proponents are, where their material solutions are coming from.
Yeah, so you teed it up really well, Aaron, and Tommy, I'll let you jump in here. But I think one of the things that you all have that is an interesting kind of design element is the Innovation Lab, the Technical Warfare Center, in line with this concept of transformation in conflict. So there's real technical work happening in situ by men and women in uniform. I think that's super interesting. Lay that out for us. So what is the lab all about, and how does it intersect with the elements that you just laid out there, Aaron?
So I think the lab at its genesis, is a really good embodiment of transforming contact, because I also think that gets thrown out as a term and as a program, and really we're getting after that it's a mindset, and you got to be able to iterate, integrate new tech, right? Make changes. Does it work? Does it not work? Capture lessons learned, get that feedback out, then get the next piece of tech in, and then start the process over again. And then you get to the point where you start realizing, hey, with maybe some of these same capabilities at a much smaller scale, maybe in-house we can start to do some of this, because we got really talented soldiers with a lot of different interests who are really good at this stuff when you give them the boundaries to go after and attack a problem and write a file or create a program, or, and it's amazing, right, with what they can do with just the stuff that interests them when given that freedom to tinker.
Yeah, and so let's make this real for folks, right? So the idea is like allowing, and I think there's somewhere between the Air Force experience with software factories, which is now spread to the Army and others, and kind of the Ukrainian experience over the last half decade or so or longer with, hey, we've no time, it's like jerry rig things on the front lines and just send them into battle immediately. So there's some spectrum there. How do you think about the build versus buy question, right? Even layering in the recent executive orders and the Secretary of Defense's guidance around, hey, look, we've got to buy commercial, we are not building kind of net new stuff. Tell us how this fits into that broader ecosystem. What are the kinds of things that soldiers are able to do in the lab?
So I'll answer that part, and then I think I'll kind of hit on kind of like how we're actually going to put some parameters around this.
Yeah, and I apologize for asking. I have a nasty habit of asking 6-part questions, so feel free to answer what you like.
Fine,
yeah.
I only give 12-part answers.
Yeah,
so.
Great.
So two of the main projects that I think I'd like to highlight, because I think that'll also kind of illuminate where we're at in terms of the process side of this. So one of the big ones, and this was sort of self-started from a training gap that we have. So I have a UAS platoon. That full build is supposed to have 4 Class 3 UAS. We still don't know which program of record is going to be aligned to that. We don't really know which capability is going to go towards that. And so As we started to kind of turn the corner into our full build about 9 months ago, we realized I'm going to have a bunch of aviation soldiers show up, and they're not going to have anything to do because I don't have any equipment to actually help them train and kind of think about their craft and how they're going to fit into the broader MDEP construct. So that was one of the main impetuses behind the UAS that we started 3D printing, was like, hey, let's just get our hands on some UAS. It's not a class 3. It's nowhere near the operational range that we need, but we can actually start to do training with our aviation soldiers. We can put them next to our EW soldiers. We can build some payloads for them. We can put them out there and let them start to train together on how they're actually going to operate in a real environment, even if the ranges aren't necessarily the same, and even if the payloads are kind of on the cheap end, not necessarily the exquisite end. So that kind of morphed into in a bunch of different ways. And then as we've started to kind of push and get more fidelity on some of the lessons learned coming out of the Ukraine, I think at a certain point we realized that, hey, there's an operational opportunity here, not just a training opportunity based on how the Ukrainians are employing those capabilities. And so that's really kind of given us a lot of motivation to continue pushing into that space. And then kind of secondarily answering the same question, but in a way that I'm incredibly proud of, because our guys just went out there and they just started to figure out how to do it. So one of our EW warrant officers came back from a trip, and he was like, hey, this is a piece of software we could use to train first person view drone pilots, even though that's not something that we would necessarily use long term. Hey, let's just play around with this a little bit and see if we can also provide kind of a virtual training experience for our aviation soldiers as well. They've been able to, over the past probably 2 months, if not even shorter, they've been able to stitch that together with our TACX mission command environment. They've been able to stitch it together and then add in some other simulation pieces on top of that. So I can actually give both my EW and my aviation operators, and then all my folks that are going to be doing C2 and mission command, like a full virtual training environment where they can actually start to play and maneuver these UASs, where a guy's actually on the joystick moving it around in the software, and then it shows up in our TACX environment with a little icon moving around, and then it actually starts to show some of the lines of bearing that would be typically generated by an EW payload that's doing sensing out there. That's allowed us to really start to do some really interesting things from a kind of multi-echelon training approach. And so those are kind of the two big projects, but then really how that kind of fits back into our processes. Really, I see this as an extension of our targeting process. So we're going to go through and we're going to identify either training or operational gaps. And then there's basically a whole checklist of things that we're going to do before we kind of get to that last piece, which is like, okay, we couldn't buy it. We don't already have it in inventory. We couldn't outsource it to either an external agency or somebody else inside the Army, or like 11th Cyber Battalion. So let's go ahead and start building this thing, or start modifying this thing in-house to the Forge. And I think as we kind of mature that workflow, that'll help us set priorities for, what's the Forge spending time being creative on, and then where are we leveraging those innovative opportunities that are already making good progress, or where a solution already exists and we wouldn't necessarily be able to do better at our level. So kind of long-winded 12-part answer. I promised a 12-part answer. I gave a 12-part answer. Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
So how does that tie in then to the exercise that you all have coming up in just a little bit here? What are you aiming to test, and what's coming from the lab that's gonna see the field?
So I think there's 2 parts, Tommy. If you don't mind, I'll take kind of the first part, the Forge tie-in, and then if you want to kind of talk the CONUS piece and kind of how that relates to some of the larger stuff, because I think that's kind of a bigger task force initiative there. So basically, this exercise, Arcane Thunder, we've split it into 2 parts essentially. So we'll have a part in Poland and then a part at Fox Range out at Fort Huachuca in Arizona. So the forward piece of this in Poland is going to bring 3 UASs that we've built. We call it the Lark. So the particular model we're using for this is a VTOL model. Different from other people because we're not necessarily following the quadcopter route. We are trying to do fixed wing UAS on this. But the goal and the con-op for that's going to be, concept of operation for that's going to be, one of these UASs goes up. It's going to have a payload that we put on there that looks for Wi-Fi signatures. The Wi-Fi signature is looking for is going to come off of a threat emulator that we've built. And so eventually the goal for that is to complete a full sensor to shooter thread from our homegrown UAS on the homegrown threat emitter that ties back into eventually a Polish unit that's going to do the firing for that. They won't shoot at the emitter; they'll actually shoot into the North Sea. But really, all of our homegrown and home-built things that are in the forge right now are going to contribute to that kind of NATO joint sensor-to-shooter threat that we're going to do out there in Poland. And then, Tommy, if you want to talk kind of ConOp for Arizona.
Yeah, I think, though, to go back to your earlier thing about you really taking the whole, like, fix through the process, right? And so you get that, like, round or effect on target. I think that's where we get to do that, right, all under the umbrella of the task force with, right, making sure we're doing it with the cyber domain and the space domain, right, and your more traditional land, sea, and air domains. I think Aaron even left out, we have like a Navy partnership in Poland, so we are making sure we are all 5 of 5 for the multi-domain task force. And then really partnering with some of the federally funded research labs and some commercial off-the-shelf technology and some programs of record, and getting into this kind of that software space in addition to the hardware space of, hey, let's get a replicated threat out there, and with all the things that do the finding and the fixing, you know, and then putting the effects on target, let's run through it, right? Like, let's play this out in a live environment and with equipment in soldiers' hands, like train the mission. So it's not conceptual anymore, right? We're going to run through it.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And I know, you know, some of these other exercises, there's kind of like a hurdle rate or a threshold rate of like, we expect, you know, 50. I think when ABMS was started, the Air Force was trying to kind of stand that up. It was like, we want 50% failure rate or something like that. You know, do you guys, how do you think about this exercise? Like, what's really the purpose of it? Is it meant to push the envelope and say, hey, we want a significant failure rate? Or is it to say, no, we're testing like the things that are supposed to work? Like, where are you at from experimentation to practice how you play?
Can we say all of the above again?
Yeah.
Because I do think there is, right, there's not many times, I think, in the military that you're supposed to or you're allowed to fail, but we will learn potentially just as much from what doesn't work as we will from what works. And back to that, like, get your hands on new tech, test it, right, integrate it, iterate on it, and kind of move on paradigm. Like, we get to do all these together, see how they play with each other, right, bringing in, you know, different sensors. Can we fuse them? Can we not fuse them? Is direction finding better than time distance of arrival, right? I mean, there's a lot of things we're gonna train on, and I think the goal is for it to work, and we think it's going to work, but not all of it's going to work, and we're going to learn, as I said, I think potentially just as much from what doesn't play out the way we envisioned it as we do from what is a success. But I don't think we are tied to a number of, hey, in the 2 use cases or the 4 use cases or however we're going to, you know, play this out, like, we got to get to a certain threshold.
Yeah, and I think this is our 3rd implementation of this exercise. It'll be the most robust by a large measure. Not to borrow, you know, from like Civilization, the video game, but for this one, you know, we kind of went with a like 1/3. Let's pick some things that we know work, so we can kind of test some of the core pieces of this. And so for the Huachuca part, you know, our K-1000s and some of the our UASs and some of the payloads we're putting on there. Technology we've already been playing around with in the last Arcane Thunders, similar technology to what 1st and 3rd MDTFs are using. So we're like, okay, so there's a core piece of equipment that we want to actually test the concept of fighting the formation. But there's these other pieces that we want to kind of see conceptually how they fit in there. So let's bring in, you know, micro habs. Let's bring in some, you know, droppable glide munitions off of those. And so I think part of the balance is you know, there's a core piece that you want to keep testing, so I can train the formation on how to actually fight multi-domain operations. But then as we're pushing the boundary forward, being willing to accept a good percentage of that as new or emerging technology that maybe is not at the same TRL level, that we can actually see how that plays into the entire concept of operation as we're kind of working these convergence.
Well, yeah, no, I love it, guys. I think, and we're what 2 weeks out from this exercise? A couple weeks, right?
Well, 2 weeks from really getting going, but my first team pushes out tomorrow, so it's
oh man,
yeah.
Well, here's the deal. We talked about this ahead of time. We'd love to have you guys back on the flip side and kind of hear what you learned and how things went. So let's end here. If we come back in 3 or 4 weeks and we talk to you guys on the flip side of the exercise, what questions should we ask you to determine kind of how things went?
Great question. Trying to conceptualize this one.
I'm asking you to do my work for me, so you can throw it back at me.
It's a good thought experiment to go through, right? Because it's the questions we got to ask ourselves at the end of it. And if we're not asking those questions, then we're asking the wrong ones. But I think part of it is to use, kind of Aaron's kind of buckets, right? Is like, okay, like what did what it said it was going to do? What were we surprised by? How effective or ineffective it was? I think
for me too, and we've had this conversation too, Tommy, where especially in the multi-domain operations sphere of influence, it's really easy, and I think this podcast is geared towards it in a certain degree too, where it's really easy to kind of think about the technology and where all the capability is going. What I'm really excited to see, and maybe not as exciting to other people out of this one, is how does the force structure that I've kind of built around to actually do the C2 and the mission command of all these capabilities, does that actually work? And how are we able to actually, do the planning, the coordination, the synchronization of all these different things. And as you start to kind of push these capabilities out, it's like, okay, that capability could do what it said it could, but that still hasn't solved the larger math problem of I got to launch it at 7:02 so that it's on station at 8:30 so that it can open up a window for the next capability that launched at 7:10 and was there at 8:33. Because that's the level of precision that we've seen happen in real world operations in our theater, in terms of being able to coordinate across a vast, space, all these different things that have to align with really great precision, but then also with great mass in terms of being able to get enough capability in that position at the same time. And there's a technological element to that equation, but there's absolutely an ability to mission command that and actually think about that. And so I think, to me, if you ask me this when we come back, is were you able to actually coordinate and synchronize all the things that you said you were going to be able to do? I think that'll be pretty telling in terms of the success of this exercise, at least from my perspective.
And I think I got a better answer too. And I think the other way is, right, as if we're looking to frame this, right, like were we successful in where we linked and delinked our experimental technological objectives from our training objectives? And as long as we didn't hinder ourselves on training objectives because of something that was, right, a tech limitation or something that was purely going to be experimental, and we got answers on all of the above, to go back to the all of the above answer, right? I think that's success too for the exercise.
Yeah, and truth be told, that was a direct lesson we learned out of the last Arcane Thunder. I think by all accounts, we had really high expectations for it, and it was a very successful event in terms of pushing the organization forward. But there were some challenges that we learned where we had sort of linked all of the training objectives to the technical objectives, and then when things started to fail, we really lost a lot of training value in that too. And so I think this will be, we'll see where we're at after this one.
Love it. All right, guys. Well, hey, good luck out there, and we'll circle back with you. Thanks for taking some time to kind of lay it out for us. It's awesome what y'all are doing, and we're rooting for you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, though.
All right. Take care.